came in and let's say they hit an area, they'd knock out some Ukrainian troops, and there was nothing but open field, open space, and they just buzzed across that open space until they hit something, and people said, well, they've got that open space. Well, they didn't really, because there was nothing there, and they didn't leave and they didn't plan to have people to hold what they had, and it got kind of in disarray. And it sounds to me like what you're saying is, okay, they take an area and there's nothing but open space, and they can make a mad race to the river. They ain't making a mad race to the river this time. That they're going to make a determination as to how far they want to move next. We also see them just with the new general digging in places, just digging in, that the places they have, there's going to be no more, we don't have enough people here. They're coming back in and take it. If you're going to come back in and take a space this time, it ain't going to be an easy job.
Yeah, and I think you're going to see with the advances, like I said, I believe it's probably going to be phased. Again, I'm not on with the Russian general staff, and there's probably some Russian colonel right now going, Ritter, you're an idiot. That's not what we're going to do. You're a fool. We're going to do the exact opposite. Okay, that's your war, man. I'm not fighting it for you. I'm just, saying from my perspective, given, what the lessons of history, I believe that the Russians will probably run a very phased operation and making sure at each phase to consolidate their positions so that the Ukrainians can never again launch a counterattack that achieves the kind of depth of penetration that they did back in September.
Now, do the Belarusian troops also serve as a reserve force? They hit an area, they got some issues, or they need extra troops, or they can draw. Can they can draw from the reserves in Belarus also? But or do you think that Belarusian contingent stays there for all the reasons that you've put up early, and that's probably not, they're not going to draw off of them?
Let me put it this way: even if let's say Russia decided to attack towards Kiev, I don't think a Belarusian soldier is going to cross the border.
Right. I mean, the Russian forces there. So the Russian forces and the Belarusian forces are kind of married in a group there. And if they got to act, you think they act together?
I think so. I personally don't see the Russians launching, at least initially, a major strike towards Kiev. Here's the thing. Let's say the war is developing and Russia's achieving these breakthroughs, and the Ukrainians are forced to strip defenses north of Kiev. And if the Russians may look at the map and go, wow, we have a golden opportunity right now to strike. But I personally don't believe they're going to do it, because they tried that once and it didn't work too well. So I don't imagine that they're going to, double down on stupid. If the Ukrainians surrender and you need a force to come in and secure Kiev, then that force is there. But I think that this force works best as a force in potential. And it's also limited by, Belarus President Lukashenko has said straight up, we're not here to invade Ukraine. It's not our job. We're here to protect the Russian flank. We're here to protect Russia and Belarus from further NATO aggression. One of their big concerns is Poland moving into Western Ukraine. Lukashenko said that is a red line. If Poland moves in, then we will have no choice. And that's where this joint group comes into play, because it can respond effectively to any Polish incursion, which I think puts the Poles in check. They're also putting the Ukrainians in check. So I think that's the purpose of that force. I don't see that force moving in. And if they did preemptively, or, I think it would only be the Russians. Again, I don't know. I don't know what kind of deal the Ukrainians and the Russians and Belarusians have cut, but I have listened to the Belarusian president speak, and he's been consistent from day one that it's not the job of Belarus to invade Ukraine, that Belarus is here to defend from Polish aggression or Ukrainian aggression against Belarus, but Belarusian forces aren't there to invade or occupy Ukraine.
Not a lot much more that I want to get to, but I do want to ask you about the latest. We heard the wonder weapon stuff for I don't know how long. Okay. Now we're hearing there was an article in the Washington Post. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Robert Gates and Condoleezza Rice. The way I read it was a certain level of desperation. The way I read it was they were saying to Europe, empty your stores. Whatever you got left, I know you've been holding out, but whatever you got left, throw it on Ukraine now. Give them what you have. And then immediately after this, we hear, okay, the French, they're giving these kind of, they're giving their news more odds and ends. And again, I just think, how can you do a mismatch of weapons that aren't networked together? And then and I put it like this: I'm Ukrainian and I got stuff with French instructions, with Belgian instructions, with German instructions, or even if I have the mercenaries, those people haven't necessarily worked together in this environment. There's a certain air of desperation, and it seems to me they're throwing their equipment into a trash compactor. That the Russians have this giant, and I put it like this: the Russians don't really have to move on things because they've set up a trash compactor. And I know it sounds cold, but that NATO's just throwing its weapons into the trash compactor. And yes, they are taking some hits, but they're just blowing these things to hell. And now the NATO's going to throw some more weapons in the trash compactor.
Yeah, it's look, I forget how many French tanks, the AMX-10. It's a wheeled vehicle. It's not really a tank. I think it'd be classified as a light tank on best, or a medium armored car. But it has a survivability factor of 0 in modern combat. The Bradley, which variant are they getting? Are they getting the one with all the bells and whistles, the upgraded variant? Are they getting old ones that have been mothballed that are going to be brought out, like the old M113s that we brought out, made to function and then turned over? The same thing with the Martyr. That's a German infantry fighting vehicle. Are they getting the new ones with all the bells and whistles? Or are they getting ones that have to be brought out, refitted, repaired, and then turned over?
The Martyr, that's an ironic name, particularly in this conflict. But okay, let's continue.
Yeah, but my point is, what, it's 50 Bradleys, 80 Martyrs. That's 130. Zaluzhny said back in November he needed 500. He ain't getting 500. On tanks, he said he needed 300. He's not getting anywhere near 300. There's some talk about people providing Leopards and all that, but they haven't crossed that line yet. The British are talking about the Challenger 2. When all these tanks came out, they were gee whiz tanks. But these aren't brand new tanks. These are old tanks. And more importantly, they're old tanks that the Russians have been spending years preparing to defeat in combat. The Challenger 2 wasn't designed to take on the T-90, MB3 or whatever the variant is out there. Its armor can't survive being hit by the Russian anti-tank rounds. The Russians outgunned them, outranged them. And it's, I might be able to say if they were fighting the British, but you got some really good British crew. I mean, this. If you take a guy who's, driven the same Camaro his entire life, and he knows everything about that Camaro, every sound, noise, he knows exactly when to do. So he can take a machine that isn't as efficient as others, but he knows how to get the best out of it all the time. He might win the race, even if he's racing faster cars. But so we take a Ukrainian crew and we put them in a Challenger 2, and they don't know anything about this tank. They don't know, so they're out there sort of trying to get a feel for it. They don't know how to maximize its pluses, and they don't know how to minimize its minuses. Meanwhile, they're going up against a T-90, MB3 tank. Goodbye, до свидания. That's all she wrote. You're going to die. I feel bad for the Ukrainians. I really do, because, let's say you're Ukrainian now launching an offensive. Remember, every army prepares to fight the last battle. So the Ukrainians' last offensive battle was one where they were able to achieve great penetrations through thinly held defenses. And now they're going to come in and they're going to try and replicate that. But if the Russians do what I said they should be doing, which is a phased operation, linking in everything, these guys are going to try and come rushing in, and they're just going to get hit right in the face. They're going down. It's going to get ugly quick. And because they don't have 500 infantry fighting vehicles. You know, they're going to run out of oomph really quick. I think, you know, all this does is extend the battle, you know, the Russian offensive by a couple weeks, because the Russians will have to, of course, defeat these 3 brigades when they're thrown in on the battlefield. But the Russians will defeat them, and then the Ukrainians will have nothing, and they'll move on. I mean, what happens when you destroy 50 Bradleys? Because they're going to be destroyed. What's to replace them? I can tell you what's going to happen. You know, if the Ukrainians destroy 50 BMP-2 or BMP-3 armored fighting vehicles, the Russians have 50 more that'll come in that quick. The Russians ain't going to run out of equipment. Their defense industry, I mean, NATO hasn't woken up to the fact that, you know, Putin signed off on a new prikaz or directive that expands the Russian military to 1.5 million. So, you know, they're going to increase the contract soldiers, but they're also going to increase conscription. They're forming a whole bunch of new airborne units, a whole bunch of new Marine units. These are forces that are expeditionary in nature, so they aren't linked to a specific geographical region. They can be brought in to do things. More artillery. In order to support all this, their defense industry is already ramped up. They're already producing at max efficiency. Weapons are already coming off the production line. Meanwhile, back in Western Europe, ain't nothing like that happening. Poland is building a single division. You know, they're equipping it with equipment that they don't produce. Other people do, but they're going to buy old M1 tanks. You're going to buy new tanks from the South Koreans. It's going to take time, but then that's it. What's Germany doing? What's France doing? What's Belgium doing? What's Netherlands doing? What's Denmark doing? What's NATO doing? And the answer is nothing comparable. Literally, what's the United States doing? I mean, if I were an American military planner right now, I'd be telling the President of the United States, we need to activate 3 armored divisions right now. Not because we need them today, but just so they're available in 2 years. But we need to get 3 divisions up and running. Now, they'll come back to me and say, we have a recruiting shortfall of 6,000. I don't know where you think you're going to get the troops to do this. And that's a different question altogether. You know, leadership will have to come up with a solution. But the bottom line is, you know, if we think we're going to take on the Russians, and I'm not talking about force on force, but make a presence known, we need to have forces capable of establishing and sustaining a presence, and we're not doing that.
Well, you know, I can say this as a person who was a former hovercraft pilot when I did search and rescue on the Bay. That Slingsby Aviation, SAH 2200 hovercraft. I could take that thing and run it 50 knots across the ice. I could do a 180 and use the prop wash to stop it. I ran that thing every day. If you don't know what you're doing with that, and I try to train you a couple weeks and you run that thing off the ice, you are dead. You are when you get up to 50 knots, stopped, and it's flipping, and you're done, and you're never going to come home again alive. So a very expensive piece of equipment made in England. So I understand what you're saying when it comes to, I can give you the best tank in the world. If you don't know what you're doing with it, you might just kill yourself running off something or going, you know, or screwing it up. If not, God knows when you come up against a tank crew or a tank division of people who have practiced maneuvering together, they're going to go through you like a hot knife through butter.
Yeah. Or as General Patton said, like crap through a goose.
Yeah, exactly. Or crap, or what, shit through a tin horn. I've heard that one too, all too many times. Last but not least, I guess well, actually, really, I think we've pretty much covered everything. Is there anything that you think that's important that our viewers need to know that you'd like to comment on?
No, I mean, I just like to bring it down to reality that this isn't Call of Duty, this isn't Medal of Honor, this isn't Fortnite, this isn't a video game. This is real. People are dying on both sides, and you know, just people should reflect on that when they talk about, you know, these sort of academic exercises of, you know, how many armored vehicles can we provide, how much ammunition. Every you know, quota of material that you're providing to the Ukrainians will eventually be married up to manpower, and they be put into combat where they're probably going to die, and they're going to be dying in a cause that's unwinnable. And so, the longer we continue to provide weapons and equipment to the Ukrainians, the longer we sustain the suffering of the Ukrainian nation. And we need to understand that at some point in time, their defense minister just came out and sort of bragged. I don't understand why he said what he said, but he's bragging that that they are the tool of NATO, that they are doing NATO's dirty work, that they're dying for NATO. Someday people may hunt him down and lynch him like they lynched other traitors or Mussolini. I'm not hoping that on the guy, but my God, you're bragging about allowing your nation to be sacrificed on behalf of NATO, is what he's bragging about, and that's shameful.